Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 165 of the Ad Nauseam podcast. My name is Dr. Jeff Winkle. I'm down here in the vomitorium with my good friend and excellent co-host, David C. Noe. How you feeling, Dave, today?
I'm doing really well, Jeff. I appreciate the kind words in the opening remarks there.
Not a problem.
It's unusual you have a little bit of role reversal.
How so?
Well, I'm wearing the tattered hat. I have the more informal, relaxed look going on.
Right.
Whereas you're wearing the tuxedo with cummerbund and bow tie.
Yes, my typical teaching outfit.
Yes. That part's not true, but usually you are the guy who is encapped.
It's
right?
true. Encapped.
Haberdashing.
And kind of decidedly, but maybe a little bit more casual.
Right.
But you're right, it has flip-flopped
More
today.
the grunge look.
Right. I'm coming right from the classroom. And so
Yes.
this is not my chosen regular everyday attire.
No, it's too formal.
It is too formal, yeah.
We got election day today in America, don't we?
We do. Are we going to get into politics? Yikes.
No, definitely not.
No.
Except we're going to talk about one book.
We are.
American Brutus.
Oh, yes.
By Michael Kauffman with respect to John Wilkes Booth.
Yes, exactly.
So, Jeff, what are we... how are you doing? I didn't ask.
Oh, I'm doing fine. Election day, it's kind of stormy and rainy out there today.
Yes.
I think the weather there kind of it matches my mood a little bit. I mean, I don't like election day.
No, I don't either.
Yeah, I'm eager for. We were just talking. We're eager for the political ads to
Oh
go
my!
away, right?
Yes, I've thought about writing you in. I wrote in a number of people this morning.
Oh, did you really?
Well, I wrote in a few in some local races.
Nice.
I voted responsibly, I would say, in other respects. But for a couple local races, I just thought, I don't know these people. What am I going to do? And so I wrote in people I do trust, but I forgot to put your name in. Maybe next year.
Now, I've always had my eye on drain commissioner.
Have you really?
Yeah, exactly.
I hear the job is, how should we put it? Takes it right out of you, just pulls it. I can't think of the word, but.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about today?
This is going to be a kind of a part two,
Yes.
right? Way back in episode 13.
152 episodes ago.
Where we were very...
Here's the sequel.
Very wet behind the ears.
Oh, my.
Right. We did an episode called Libris Helluari.
That's right.
To devour books.
Yeah,
right?
buried in books, gorging on books.
Right.
Yeah.
And I believe we were just talking before we flipped the mics on. Is that
right?
I don't remember this episode very well.
Oh well, it's the dim past.
Right. You helpfully left on the copy in front of me.
That's right.
Kind of a summary of what that episode is all about. But we were talking about some of our favorite books, both in antiquity and I think also in the present day.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. If I could read just a little bit of our own purple prose from pages past.
Yes.
This week, Jeff and Dave tag along with Cicero to sunny Tuscany, where they find Cato Eutychensis, knee-deep in a pile of books on Stoicism, gorging on books, Helluari, Libris, and literary addiction, Aviditas Legendi, is our theme. As we share favorite authors and works from the ancient and modern worlds, first up is a primo piatto. That was you, Jeff.
That's
Italian.
first course, yes.
Of Plato, followed by savory servings of Sophocles and Appian afters. If you still have room for more, stroll out with Jeff and Kazantzakis. Is that right?
Yes.
For a nightcap on Crete, and join Dave as he doles out cigars and scotch to C.S. Lewis and Thomas Sowell. Which books have you feasted on recently?
Excellent. Now it's starting to come back to me.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So we talked about what we're reading, what we like to read. It's not meant to be one of those show-off kinds of lists.
No.
Have you seen those sorts of things? People at the end of the year in review of the books I've read?
I've seen those like that link come up, but I've studiously avoided them.
Yeah, I don't like that. It's too ostentatious.
Right.
So I'm not sure how we're going to go through this without giving people the sense that, oh, look at what we read. But it's more along the lines of it's a 2-man temporary book club.
Yeah.
And y'all are invited to join us if you want.
Right. And I'm certainly from my point of view to attend to that issue of like showing off.
Right.
So you asked me in prep for this, list some books that you've read in the last, 6 months or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's a few on here that I am frankly embarrassed by.
Really?
Yes. Right, but
Okay.
warts and all, right? Let's bring
Yeah.
it all on. Let's put it all on the table.
Absolutely. So let's begin with a little bit of a definition here of
Yes.
Helluari, because this is a fantastic verb to my mind, Latin verb deponent, first conjugation. Helluari.
I have to say that, like, in all my years
Yeah.
studying and teaching Latin, it wasn't until you proposed that episode way back when,
Right.
and gave it this title. I had never encountered that verb before.
Well, it's not common. I had only encountered it once, and that's just because I decided to write my dissertation on Cicero's De Finibus.
of course, right.
Can you read the Lewis and short definition there?
Yeah, so helluar, helluaratus, it's a deponent verb, right?
Right.
So it has passive forms, but it has an active meaning. And I guess it also takes, does it take the dative or it takes the
Ablative.
Ablative.
Libris,
okay.
ablative. So it's an ablative instrument, right?
Gotcha.
So by means of that.
By means of, all right.
Right.
And it means to gourmandize, which is
Ooh.
also, I think I encountered that word for the first time.
Yeah.
To devour. Excellent. Yeah.
Then there's a number of Latin quotations, one of which is the Finibus 3.2, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we got this, Ille gurges helluatus tecum simo rei publicae sanguinaire, which is something like that vast whirlpool was gorging himself with you at the same time on the blood of the Republic. So guzzling down the blood of the Republic. Ooh, grim image.
That is very grim. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. And then there's this wonderful, this Latin quote that you also included there.
Yeah.
You want to read that and translate that?
Sure. So this is from Cicero to Varro, and it's in his collection of letters Ad Familiares, book 9.4, and it's Si hortum in bibliotheca habes, nihil deerit, which means, Jeff?
That means if you have a garden in a library, you have everything you need.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Isn't that beautiful?
Right. Yep.
So you got a garden. You have a front porch garden, if I'm not mistaken.
We do, and my wife does wonders out there. We live in a city house,
Right.
kind of a postage stamp of land, but we have this strip that kind of between the road and the sidewalk.
Okay.
Which apparently is called the hell strip. Have you ever heard that term?
Never heard that term.
Right. And so
The strip between the sidewalk and the road?
in the road is called the hell strip.
Huh.
And so my wife has done wonders with our particular hell strip, and it's turned it into this wonderful garden.
Fantastic.
But I love that image of a garden in a library, and that's all you need.
Have you driven by my home in the evening?
Not in the evening, no.
Well, not recently, but within the last year, you dropped me off once when we were recording late at night.
Yeah.
And I have a little bit of a sunroom on the east side.
I know it.
And remember, because you've been in it.
I have.
Yeah, and if you look at it in the evening, I have this unique bookshelf system, which I really like, where the books are kind of elevated above the windows.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then I have a lot of plants in there. So this is my attempt at
combining the garden and the library.
That's correct.
That's wonderful.
That's my attempt to put the bookstore or the bookshelves in the garden. So
yeah.
what do you want out of life? What do you want? It's very Epicurean, right?
Very Epicurean.
The first thing you want is the first pleasure is friendship. The second pleasure is literature, and the third pleasure is to be in your garden.
Exactly. And here with picturing Cicero and Cato together, doing all three of those things at once.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a pretty picture.
It's good.
So come along, audience, as we talk about some of the things that we have been reading and studying together recently. Because let's face it, Jeff, we are lifelong students, right?
We are.
That's the goal.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's nice to get to the point in one's career where you're not driven constantly by the need to read things for the sake of meeting some deadline.
Exactly.
But you can actually read and stretch your intellectual curiosity in whatever direction you want.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I have to admit, when you proposed this and then you asked for a list of books, I was a little nervous. I thought, have I read that much?
Right.
And so what I ended up doing was going to the local library website, and they can go through your checked out history.
Oh yeah.
And so I was pleased to say, I've done pretty well in the last 6 months. Or
but Jeff, it's not about reading a lot of books, right? As Seneca says, non multa sed multum legendum est.
Yes, right.
Don't read a lot of different things. Read deeply.
Yes, exactly. Right. So I think, I've read a mix of stuff that I think I've read deeply and appreciated, have challenged me, and some stuff that is just frankly fluff.
Yeah, right. Sure. Everybody needs some fluff.
Right.
I think I tend not to keep track of my fluff as much. Maybe that's why. But I read fluff like anybody else.
Yeah.
So as we get into it today, Jeff put down a number of titles that he's read in the last 6 months or so.
Yeah.
And then we're going to deal with mine a little bit later on. We've got one book that overlaps, and that's that American Brutus.
Yeah.
Although you read it some time ago.
A number of years ago. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm just only 3/4 of the way through. Mm-hmm. But we're going to borrow some questions. And
Yes.
that's because we're lazy. So let's see, how would I put this in Latin? Pigritia, laziness. Pigritia nos de vexat, has overtaken us. And where do these questions come from, Jeff?
This comes from bookclub.com.
All right.
Right. So that sounds legit. That sounds official, right?
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever been part of a book club?
No, I don't think so. I have been a part of many weekday evening Bible study kind of things over the years. Not recently. And but, you know, where everybody's supposed to read a chapter of either the scriptures or some theological work, and then we talk about it together.
Yeah.
That's probably the closest I've been to an actual book club. But no, I mean, I'm usually a book club of one.
Right.
And that's because I am so particular about what I read.
Yeah.
I am really, frankly, kind of ornery about it.
Really?
Like if someone gives me a book, I'm often kind of irritated by, why are you doing that? Right?
Yes.
And I've likened it to if a person is a dentist, right? Maybe I've used this with you before, but if a person is a dentist, you don't give them dental instruments as gifts.
Yes.
Because the dentist wants to choose his own tools.
Yes.
Right? So no, I'm not as well paid as a dentist, but I see myself similarly as a professional, as an expert.
Yeah.
So I think of books as the tools of my trade.
Yeah.
So if someone gives me a book, I kind of think, why would you do that? Why do you think I want to read that? But people have told me, you know, more normal and socially well-adjusted people, that's just ornery of you, and I should just see it as a kindness and just take it and say thank you, whether I ever read it or not.
Yeah. I think that is. I mean, if I had
that good
advice to
advice?
you, I would follow that. But I think people don't think of books as tools of the trade.
That's probably the difference.
That's actually not where I thought you were going. With that metaphor.
With the dentistry,
I thought it was going to be more like it's like someone buying you a shirt. And saying, "Oh, you assume that's my fashion sense." So somebody buying a book is like, "I assume that I know what you would like to read."
Well, that is part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think those assumptions are often really ill-founded. Don't you think?
Unless somebody knows you really, really well.
Which is why buying a book for someone is kind of a dangerous thing to do, because it's not a consumable,
right?
And it's not something you can give away. It's something I'm just thinking out loud here.
Yeah.
It's something you're asking the person to interact with on an intellectual level.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And maybe even sometimes an emotional or spiritual level. And what if I'm overanalyzing this, but what if the level is not the one you would choose? So let's say you gave me a book on something like Get to Know Your Horse. Right?
Right.
There's a lot of assumptions built into that book title.
Yeah.
A, I don't have a horse. And B, Jeff, if I had one, I wouldn't want to get to know him.
Yes.
So why would you give me a book like that?
Exactly. Yeah.
But if I gave you a book along the lines of I don't know, the community college professor as rock star.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That
right.
hits two things. And so it's not a big challenge.
Yeah.
But I just find that can be so awkward.
Yes, exactly. Right? No, I think buying a book, it falls in that category that it's fraught with with some dangers. I think.
Because of that intellectual and emotional element.
Yes.
That isn't I don't think it's in other things, right? You like chocolate, you don't like chocolate. Right. You took the raisins, you didn't take the raisins. It's pretty straightforward.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. But I'm sure I'm certainly guilty of what I'm about to say. Is that I think that in the times where I have bought books for people,
right,
it's often stemmed from, I loved this.
Yes.
And I want you to love it too.
Totally.
But it's
an audience, he's pointing the finger at me now.
Right, but I don't think ahead to think, well, does this fall within kind of the wheelhouse of their interests?
It's
right.
Giving someone a book seems like, again, I'm overanalyzing it, such an intimate thing.
It is. It can be.
Right?
Yeah.
So, like, here's an undergarment, right? This is a book, you're asking me to take this into my intellectual world, and I guess I'm just I just guard it maybe too carefully. I don't know.
Perhaps, but yeah.
I gave you a book for your birthday last year.
Yes,
you remember that?
The one on which I Helluari, I devoured it.
Yeah, it was on I Know Who You Are. I think
it was using kind of DNA to track down to kind of solve old crimes.
Yeah, specifically the
Golden State Killer.
The Golden State Killer.
It was fascinating. But you knew.
Oh, but I remember though, Winkle. Let's be honest here with the audience. I remember you said that you liked it.
Yeah.
And you were grateful for it.
Yeah.
But you said the book was a little bit too much about the author.
It was. I mean, it got to be a little repetitive. What I found fascinating, what I loved about it was just the way that technology has just blown open the doors of police investigations.
Yeah.
That was fascinating. Yes, I mean,
solve a 40-year-old crime.
It's incredible.
Based on 1/10 of a gram of DNA.
Exactly. That's the fascinating part. Yeah. I mean, it got to be a little repetitive because you can only make sitting at your computer and plugging in little pieces of evidence from Ancestry.com only so engaging.
Right.
But that was. I mean, and that stemmed from the fact that I love true crime.
Exactly.
Right. And so it wasn't.
And that this was a particularly famous case.
Yes.
And the book was well reviewed in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, and rightly so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was a hit, not a miss.
Absolutely.
All right. So when Mrs. Noe gave me a Father's Day gift about a decade ago, probably 15 years ago, one of the best gifts book-wise I've ever gotten, and it's no surprise that it came from her because she knows me, right?
Yeah.
So she's already in my intellectual world, you might say.
Right.
It was Bobby Fischer Goes to War.
Well, what's that one?
Well, it's about the Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky chess match in the late 60s, which was an avatar for the Cold War.
Right.
So it had everything that I liked. It had chess, it had history, it had intrigue, and it was well written.
Yeah.
So that was a hit.
Yes.
But this giving books and taking books, risky business.
Now, with that book, had you mentioned, say, hey, this looks interesting, or did your lovely wife say
she figured it all out on her own?
Wow, that's even better.
Yeah, isn't that great?
That's fantastic.
I mean, she knew that I liked the elements, but and so that's something that I find that's really hard to do.
Right.
So I suppose you could say, hey, I'm going to move in with you, I'm going to move in with you for 6 weeks, get to know you a little bit, have breakfast with you, then I'll buy you a book.
Right.
All right, so Jeff, what's on your list? And let's take it apart using these questions from bookclub.com. What's your first title?
Sure. The first title, and I think I didn't necessarily kind of rank these.
Yeah.
But I think in putting this together, I did move this one up to the top of the list because this is one of the better ones that I've read recently.
All right.
This is called Demon of Unrest by Erik Larson.
Demon of Unrest.
Yes.
Can you give us a 30-second, 1-minute synopsis? What's it about?
Yes. So it's Erik Larson. He's probably most famous for his books Devil in the White City.
Okay.
He's one of these great popular history writers that can thread that needle between kind of the intellectual and the lay reader.
Right.
And this is a history that takes looks at the period between Lincoln's first inaugural and the attack on Fort Sumter.
Oh.
And
that's a short window.
It is a short window, but
or a small window.
It's what Larson is so good at is finding the primary sources that have either never been looked at or never found their way into any kind of widely read history,
right? And
bringing kind of the diaries and the letters and these figures alive, and it is fascinating. I mean, it's one of those those parts of history that I generally know the story, the build up to the beginning of the Civil War and the tensions and the misgivings surrounding Lincoln's early presidency. But this is
you're always whistling Dixie.
But yeah, it brings that period alive in such a colorful, engaging, novelistic type of way.
Right.
So I think it's not a short book, but I think I read it over 2 or 3 days. It was fantastic. Yeah.
So you do really gorge on books that way.
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a couple of bookclub.com questions because I thought these were good. And short answer: have you ever been part of a book club?
I have.
Okay.
It was a small group. That it kind of came out of church, but it kind of turned into just like, hey, one person chooses a book for this month and we'll get together at the end of the month and we'll talk about it. But what it turned into is we'd show up to get together and maybe 2 people had read the book. Yeah. And then it just turned to kind of a fun hangout session. So it was a book club that never kind of was
without the books. It was just a club.
Right. Exactly. But I have to say that I joined because I like these people.
Yeah.
I don't like the concept of a book club. I'm kind of like you. I'm kind of a book club of one.
Yeah. So why is that?
I don't know. I don't know why that is. Yeah.
Maybe for the same reasons that we ended up being professors. It was either that or dentistry, and I thought the professorate would pay more. But.
Oh man, well, you're wrong about that. But I mean, it's ironic because in my classes, I assign students books, and then we get together and talk about.
Yeah, but you're paid to do that,
right? Exactly. So maybe,
and you're in charge.
Maybe that's the part of it. It's like bringing your work home. I just don't want to do that.
Yeah, I can see that. So here's a book club question.
Yeah.
How much did you know about this book, Demon of Unrest, before picking it up? And what surprised you most about it?
So I knew nothing about it. This was one, speaking of lovely wives, my wife got this under. She knows I love Erik Larson.
Okay.
And she saw this was coming out, and she picked it up for me from the bookstore the day it came out.
Wow.
And she says, I think you'd like to read this. And she was absolutely right.
Huh.
What surprised, I was not surprised that I liked it. I knew, I've read all of Larson's books, and so I knew that this was likely to be going to be a 4 to 5 star offering.
Right.
What I was surprised about was exactly what you're talking about, that it's at such a narrow window. Like, how are you going to cover this?
So the inauguration was in January or March.
March.
And Sumter was April 12th.
Right.
So
it's barely a month, right? Huh. And so I thought, how is he going to stretch this out? How is this not going to be bogged down?
Right.
And it wasn't.
Which often happens. You know, I find an author has a great premise, but the premise could be expressed in a single chapter.
Yeah.
Then they have to pad it with 7 or 8 additional chapters in order to make it into a book.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And that can be kind of annoying when you see that start to happen.
Extremely. Yes. I would say one thing that also surprised me that I was not aware of historically was how many people on both sides of the aisle, the Democratic and Republican aisle, thought Lincoln was a dolt.
Totally.
And they thought, okay, at best he's going to be a puppet we can use. And like Seward,
right,
said, well, he can sit in the chair, but I'm going to be running the show.
Yeah, the New York senator.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
So another quote before we go on to another question before we go on to the next title.
Right.
If there was one thing about the book you could have improved, and what would that be?
I think that the one thing that it was a bit of a tease is that he did do some kind of backstory about the election of Lincoln, and kind of the improbability of this Illinois lawyer of being elected, and then fairly quickly shifted the primary sources to South Carolina. Okay, and he was much more interested. And this is not a flaw of the book, but he was much more interested in kind of presenting what was going on in South Carolina from a Southern point of view. What were the different kind of misgivings and fears that the people had as this kind of boiled over? So he teased with the Lincoln stuff, and I thought, I want more of that.
Yeah.
But that's fine. You have to make those kinds of choices. Yep.
And I guess I was a little bit dishonest because I have one more question, which I think we have to ask of each of these books, and that is number 13.
Yes.
Which is not from bookclub.com, but of our own fabrication. What does this book have to do with the classics?
I would say...
Come on, connect it.
At a glance, there's nothing readily specific. Other than that, I would say that I think one of the reasons I went into the classics and continue to be fascinated by them is because it instilled in me a love of reading, a love of knowledge, and a love of history.
Yes.
Right. And so I because of my studying the classics, I've always been interested in various historical narratives from around the world, in particular American history.
Yes. Yeah. And it's really nice to revisit eras, as you did here, about which you already know quite a bit, but then you get a little bit more of a fuller picture.
Exactly.
Which can be very pleasing.
Right. And you can be surprised by, I guess I didn't know as much as I thought. Yeah.
Okay, second title.
Yeah.
American Heiress, Jeffrey Toobin.
Yes.
What is that?
That is the story of the Patty Hearst kidnapping by the Symbionese Liberation Army. And so it's one of these things where I'd watch documentaries.
Yeah.
And I knew
Saturday morning cartoons
about Patty Hearst.
Yeah, right? Maybe they don't cover that.
No, but I mean it's this famous story, early 1970s, where she is the heiress. She's the heir to the great Hearst fortune. So she was the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst,
the journalist, the newspaper mogul,
magnate, right? Yeah, Hearst Castle, all of that, and so she becomes targeted by these morons. I think that's one of the big takeaways I took from this book is how stupid these would-be revolutionaries were.
I see.
Right, and how in many ways Patty herself was vapid.
Yeah.
And so the most famous part of that story is that she becomes, in some interpretations, a victim of the Stockholm syndrome. Like, so she's kidnapped, but then she becomes one of them.
I see.
Takes part in these bank
robberies. They make
robberies.
her part of her book club, their book club.
Right. But we're going to talk about American Brutus and John Wilkes Booth.
Yeah.
This is the problem when theater kids get
careful. Winkle.
Theater kids.
We got a lot of theater kids out there listening.
Well, listen, theater kids mixed with revolutionary politics.
Yeah.
Terrible idea, right? And all of these not all, but most of these people in the so-called SLA were these radicalized theater
I
kids
see.
who saw themselves as being larger than life and playing this kind of playing out this divine story.
Gasoline and matches.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on. Question 13.
Question 13. What does this have?
What did that have to do with classics, American eras?
Absolutely nothing.
Did Jeffrey Toobin, the author, ever study Latin?
I have no idea.
Probably.
It's possible.
Well, maybe we'll hang it on that.
I would say that, the Toobin talks a lot about the education of the various players in here, and there's no evidence that any of them took anything having to do with the classics. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe that's what set them on the wrong.
That's the recipe for revolution.
Right, there you go.
So was Patty, was she the inventor of the donut? You know?
What?
The Hearst donuts? You remember that from grade school?
Yeah, do you want a Hertz donut?
That's right.
And the person says yes, and then you punch them?
You punch them and then you say...
Hertz donut.
Exactly.
Oh man, that's not a good way to make friends.
All right. So that's your second title.
Yeah.
I think we just keep going in order here because I like it. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
The third one is by Paul Jeffers.
Yes.
Freemasons.
Yes.
Inside the world's oldest secret society. That's a Winkle title.
It does.
Beginning to end.
It sounds great, but you know what?
Right.
Disappointing.
Oh no.
Very disappointing. So this is, I often will, the stuff that I read will come from like a moment during my day, and it bugs me when there's a topic that I know a little bit about,
right.
and then I'm challenged and say, well, I need to know more about that.
I feel that way too.
Yeah. And so we were talking about mystery cults in class, and a student kind of made the comparison to the Freemasons. So I guess a secret society, secret rituals,
right. secret handshake,
initiations. And I knew there was some kind of broad connection there. And but I said, I need to know more about the Freemasons. And so I looked at online, look at reviews, what's going to be a good introduction. This one was highly recommended by the internets.
Oops.
And boy, it was dull.
What did bookclub.com say about Mr. Jeffers and his Freemasonry?
I don't know.
I'm asking you.
Right?
No.
I would imagine if bookclub.com had read the book, they would say, wow, great title,
right?
But a thin premise. It turns out that if Jeffers is correct, the Freemasons are pretty boring.
Really?
Yes.
They're like the stonecutters on The Simpsons.
Exactly.
They just drink beer and play ping pong.
Right. So it started out very promising. They were talking about how some of the mysticism around the Freemasons is thought to go back to the building of Solomon's Temple.
Okay.
Or even
now you're getting a little closer to the classics. Keep going.
Okay, and the building of Noah's Ark.
Yep.
And but particularly kind of this kind of apocryphal Mason,
right?
Who built the better part of Solomon's Temple, but then was kind of mysteriously murdered. And then there's connections with the Knights Templar, which were their early castle was situated near where Solomon's Temple was. Okay, I love that.
Careful,
stuff.
You're going to make this interesting.
Right? But then they shift to all the figures in American history that were Freemasons.
Yeah.
So Benjamin Franklin was a notable Freemason.
A long list of not much.
Well, yeah.
In terms of interest.
Yes. And then most of the founding fathers were also Freemasons. But it turns out that, what did that mean? Did it speak to anything kind of sinister under the table? The creepy triangle eye on the back of the dollar bill.
I was just going to talk about that.
I want our connections to tangential connection to the Illuminati.
Yes,
it's all smoke and mirrors.
Okay,
and it was dull.
Okay, so before I make a classical connection to help you out there, let me ask you question number 12 from bookclub.com.
Right,
rate this book on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest.
I'd give it a 3.
Ooh, that's quite low.
Yes, I would not recommend this book. Yeah.
So one way I try to connect Freemasonry to the classics is when I was teaching Latin in the classroom. Well, I still am, but I would ask them, does anybody have a dollar bill? And then a student would volunteer the dollar bill, and I would take it up in front of the class, and I'd say, on the back here, you can see this creepy triangle, this creepy pyramid with an eyeball right on top.
Yeah.
And it says, Anuit Coiptis, right? He smiled on our beginnings.
Yes.
So the eye is like the eye of providence, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's the beginnings of the country. And then below it says Novus Ordo Cyclorum, the New World Order.
Yes.
Which the Americans were inaugurating, they said.
Yeah.
So I would explain all of this because it's a Latinate connection. And then my shtick was, then I would just slip the dollar bill into my pocket and continue lecturing. And I did this over and over. I was quite practical. And I would wait for the student to say,
to object.
Excuse me. I'd say, what? This is Latin class. And it's a pretty good gag. Yeah. Got some chuckles.
Not bad.
So, all right.
But I mean, that phrase, the New World Order, that also has all kinds of, creepy conspiratorial resonance to it.
Okay, this is an interesting one.
Yes.
Running with the Devil.
Yeah, here we go.
A backstage past, the wild times, loud rock, and the down and dirty truth behind the making of Van Halen by Noel Monk.
Yes, right.
Now, this is a family show. Winkle,
Right.
Don't forget.
Yeah, I certainly cannot go into a lot of the details revealed in this book on a family show.
Nor recommend it, maybe.
Well, it's certainly not for kids.
Right.
But one of the kind of the subgenres that I love is music biographies, autobiographies about bands that that I love or have loved in my past.
Right.
And I love kind of those. It's hard to find ones that are fairly well written. They tend to be a little bit tabloidy. This one kind of veers into the tabloidy.
Okay.
But it's an interesting perspective. Noel Monk was for Van Halen. For all those Van Halen fans out there, in the David Roth years, which is 1978 to 1985, Noel Monk was their principal manager. Okay. And so he tells the story.
So it's really an insider's view.
Yeah. And you get it from a non-band member of trying to kind of keep these crazy people on some kind of straight and narrow.
Theater kids.
I think David Lee Roth was probably a theater kid.
But huge money making, right?
Yes.
So the Mr. Monk, the manager, he's highly motivated to make this work, right? Because there's just so much money to be had from it.
Sure, right. And one of the interesting kind of details is that they hired him on a month-to-month basis.
Oh,
they could technically fire him for any reason, at any time, and so
it's a pretty good contract.
Yeah,
for them,
right. But he talks about kind of walking this tightrope, and I love those kind of behind-the-scenes stories about bands that I loved in my youth.
Yeah. So let me ask you question number 9 from bookclub.com.
Yes.
What was the most challenging or difficult part of the book for you to read or understand, and how did you overcome it?
It was a very easy book to understand.
Okay.
This was not written at a very high intellectual level.
Okay.
It was written by Noel Monk with,
ghostwriter who did the heavy lifting.
Ghostwriter guy.
Okay.
The most challenging, it was very repetitive.
Okay.
It was in some ways, he takes you kind of through the various tours that
So then they played in Albany. And then they played in New York, and then they played in Buffalo, and then they played in Cleveland. It's kind of like that.
It's the same shtick over and over again. Nobody really matures or grows, except for Noel, right? He presents himself as kind of the fatherly figure that really
keep these young ruffians in line so he can make the money.
And they end up firing him at the end of the day, and so how ungrateful. And they didn't understand all that I did for them.
So those are the subtones, kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So it was. A lot of it was very repetitive, and it probably could have been half as long and just as good. Yeah.
So, question 13.
Yeah.
What does this book have to do with the classics?
Well, I think that a lot of Eddie Van Halen's arpeggiatic music is based on classical musical structures.
That's true. There's also Phrygian modes,
right?
Lydian modes, Delian modes, and other
all
such
those things, which Mr. Van Halen had no clue about and just knew them intuitively.
Although he was quite a good classical pianist.
He did, but he played by his own accounts. He played entirely by ear. He played by memorizing the music that he heard. Now he could never read it. And so he had no interest in theory. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Glad we didn't talk about the brown M&Ms.
That's in there.
All right. So as I look at the rest of the list and I look at the clock, how about you pick the next title? And if I don't like it, I'll veto it.
Yeah, sure. I'll pick the one on my list that is actually classically themed.
Okay.
This is my most recent book I've read. It's called Unearthing the Family of Alexander the Great, the Remarkable Discovery of the Royal Tombs of Macedon by one David Grant.
Okay.
And this was excellent.
Oh.
I brought it kind of out of necessity. And so I'm teaching a new class on Greek art and archaeology.
Oh, nice.
And so I wanted to do a spotlight day on the discoveries at Vergina, right?
That's right.
Or Ige, the ancestral kingdom of capital of the Macedonians, right?
Now, we've both been there, but were we there together?
We were not. I went there as a college student.
Okay.
Did you go there with...
I went there with both Ken Bratt and Young Kim.
Oh, you did? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's one of the great archaeological discoveries of all time, right? And so they found under this tumulus, or Manolis Andronicus,
right,
great archaeologist, found these...
Who has a strange... I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Who has a strange physical likeness to Philip II, Alexander's father?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's very eerie. But he discovered a couple of these unlooted royal tombs, one of which that there's controversy, but most archaeologists believe contains the bones of Philip II, Alexander the Great's
Right.
father. And if Alexander the Great's body hadn't been hijacked and taken to Alexandria, it's very likely that he would have been entombed in this same tumulus. So I mean, I love the way that they have that preserved. They kept the tombs under the tumulus. You walk into that causeway.
Yes.
It's magnificent.
Yes, and when I went down there with Ken Bratt, there's a sign that says no pictures.
Yeah.
And Ken Bratt, who's been on the show here 3 times,
Yes.
looked around, seeing no guards, took a picture.
What?
And I thought, Ken Bratt, you are my model for, scholarly decorum, and you just took a photograph.
Yes. I mean,
I saw my jaw on the ground, and he said, it's not going to harm the
right.
2,000-year-old remains.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. No, I remember traveling him with as well, and there were kind of certain things that were like, okay, no, that's a line too far. I am not obeying that.
Yeah.
That stricture.
But when you hold someone in such high esteem,
Exactly. I know
it's
what
a
you
little unsettling.
Right. So with this was I bought the book, yes, because I was interested, but it was also out of necessity because I wanted to present this very well for my class. And so I bought it in anticipation of that lecture, and it was a gold mine. And it was also very, very readable.
Yeah.
It was
That's so hard to do.
it's hard to make a page turner out of an archaeological discovery.
Right.
But it was fantastic. Yeah.
So let me ask you question 5
Yes.
from bookclub.com. And it's a 3-parter. How did the book make you feel? Did it evoke any emotions? Did it make you laugh, cry, or cringe?
I did not laugh, cry, or cringe, but
You never chuckled?
I didn't. It's not a very funny book.
Okay.
I mean, my jaw dropped in amazement.
Yeah.
But it was, the one time I was there was when I was 20 years old, and just a newbie to all of this stuff.
Yes.
And so it made me, the emotion was, I got to get back there, and I got to see this now after kind of years of studying these things.
Yeah.
So it really made it instilled in me a longing to return to Vergina. Yeah.
I think the last time I was there was 2015, which frankly feels like yesterday, but it was 9 years ago.
9
It'll be 10 years, actually.
Wow. Yeah, man. Things
Stunning.
go so fast. It's crazy.
Yep.
Yep.
And I guess we don't have to ask, what does that book have to do with classics?
No, that is the one on my list that is in that wheelhouse. Yes.
All right, let's see. Pick one more from
Okay.
the list here. Maybe the one about Robert Johnson, or maybe you want something else.
I'm gonna pick a true crime one.
Okay.
Because this is just one. I picked it just because I thought it was excellent. This one was called "Nothing But the Night: Leopold and Loeb and the Truth Behind the Murder That Rocked 1920s America" by Greg King.
Oh.
So Greg King is one of these guys. He's not as good as Larson.
Okay.
But he's right up there. There's another book just below this on the assassination of Franz Ferdinand that he wrote.
Right.
But one of these guys that can
Oh, you've read 2 King books.
2 King books.
All right.
But he is one of these guys that can take a complex historical issue, research it very well, source it very well, and then turn it into a novelistic page turner. But this one is so Leopold and Loeb, the so-called thrill killers, this really kind of awful crime that took place in the south side of Chicago in the 1920s. That Clarence Darrow became their defense lawyer. And
Okay.
it's one of these stories that I'd heard a lot about, and particularly when I lived in Chicago, that kind of came up again and again. It was the first time I kind of encountered that history. And so it's like with the Freemasons, it's one of those things that I heard a lot about it, and I got to a point like, okay, I need to know more about
Right.
this. And so I got the Greg King book out of the library, and it was fantastic. So well sourced, lots of I love photographs that show you how it was, and then what does the site look like today?
Yeah, I like those too.
And it's it's right in the general neighborhood. I mean, where this stuff happened is 2.5 hours away,
Right.
And so it makes it very local,
Right.
And it's
2.5 hours from where we are now.
Right, exactly.
But local to you when you lived in
Yes.
Chicago for those formative years at Northwestern.
exactly right. So it was much more local when I lived there, but even today, not that far away.
No.
So that also kind of makes it hit more home. And but yeah, just a fascinating story and a fascinating peek into. It was one of these. It kind of reminded me of the O.J. Simpson trial.
Yeah.
There's kind of pre-O.J. and there's post-O.J. and this one was one of these that there's kind of no going back after that case. Yep.
So let me ask you question number 10
Yep.
from bookclub.com. How would you adapt this book into a movie, and whom would you cast in the leading roles?
That's a really good question. I think this story has been in a number of movies, although I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Disney's Beauty and the Beast?
What's that?
No,
What?
that's not the adaptation.
No, I don't think so. I think, who would I cast? So Leopold and Loeb.
These are the names of the two murderers, who went on this killing spree.
They were these two kids that were from the upper crust of Chicago society. Too much money and too much time on their hands.
Deadly combination.
And so, who would play that role? I think that
most of the actors that you or I would mention are already passé.
Yeah, exactly. I would say maybe a younger Leonardo DiCaprio. Would be fantastic in one of those roles.
You saw Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah.
Good movie.
Good movie. I like him a lot generally as an actor. Maybe even a younger Brad Pitt, because they were known as being very smooth and suave and attractive. And,
but lots of monstrous behavior under the surface.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the connection to the classics, number 13.
Let's see. I think there is talk in that book about how Leopold and Loeb both had the finest education that was available to them, and there is talk about they were kind of steeped in the classics, and about them being bored and distracted during Latin class.
Really?
Yes.
Well, this is why, and I think maybe this is one of the things that we have in common. I don't know if we have a lot in common, Jeff, but one of the things we have in common is I think we're both highly skeptical of the value of education per se.
Yeah.
Right? That just having a good education is virtually meaningless when it comes to other aspects of life.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a good example of that.
Yeah, exactly.
In other words, getting people more knowledge really has nothing to do with what kind of people they are.
Exactly, right. It's another way of saying is that of being impressed by, you went to that school, right? But the name on the diploma often has very little to do with you being educated in a meaningful sense.
Maybe this is why we're not a part of book clubs.
Maybe this is
like a book club says, hey, we're going to read War and Peace, right? What would be your first response?
No.
Yeah. Mine would probably be some kind of smart alecky mocking remark, but maybe I should reconsider.
Yeah.
Speaking of reconsidering,
yes,
it's time for the ads.
This episode of adnauseum.com podcast thing we do is brought to you by Hackett Publishing.
All right.
Man, these guys have been with us from the beginning since, 2020?
Yes, it's been 4 years.
Wow.
I wrote a little note and tied it to the leg of a passenger pigeon and sent it off to
Hackett Publishing,
which has offices in
Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Indianapolis, Indiana. And I remember back when you were kind of talking about getting a sponsor, I thought, great idea. Never going to happen.
Yeah, you thought that's a lark.
It is a lark.
And I said, no, it's a pigeon.
Oh, but they came back and they said, yeah,
we'll do it.
Let's do it. And they've been with us ever since.
That's right.
And so, listener, if you go to hackettpublishing.com and click around, you will find this vast catalog of affordable and attractive books. If you're interested in the classics, it's a treasure trove. They have all kinds of translations of any corner of the classics you want to look at. Often multiple translations of the same work by different authors. There is Islamic studies. There's philosophy. There is Eastern
history of the samurai.
Yes, it's
South American studies.
It's all over the place, and you'll be astounded by the selection and by the price. These guys, we were talking about threading needles.
Right.
Hackett threads that needle between high quality and affordability.
They probably even have a title, The History of Embroidery.
Probably.
When it comes to threading needles.
Right. So do yourself a favor. Check out hackettpublishing.com. Find the books that you want. Drop them into the little grocery satchel. And if you type in the coupon code, Dave, what is it for Hackett?
It is AN ad nauseum. Then the current year, which for now is 2024.
Yes.
AN 2024.
And that will get you 20% off your entire order and free shipping.
That's incredible. And let me just say, here's a little bit of admonition to our audience. What is the title of this particular episode? It's, gorging on books, something like that. Right. So, Libris Helluari. I just gave you an imperative in the second plural, which means
gorge on books.
Gorge on some books.
Right.
And you can do it with Hackett.
Do it. Check it out.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by Ratio Coffee. Ratio Coffee, the brainchild, the brew child of entrepreneur Mark Helweg.
Yes.
Formerly my student. That's the connection to the classics. And about 10 years ago, he said, there's no high quality pour over countertop home coffee machine. I'm going to invent one.
Man.
So he made the Ratio 8, which is the flagship, the Millennium Falcon. That's what you're brewing with now, right?
Indeed. Yep.
You also made the Ratio 6, its little brother, and you brewed with the 6 a while.
Yes, for a long time.
That's right. And coming out actually this month is the Ratio 4.
Very exciting.
So mine is in the mail as we speak because I was an early adopter, and we're going to give one away on this program very soon. But before we talk about some specifics of the 4, Jeff, can you talk in general about what makes the Ratio family of brewers so superb?
Well, it's an attractive looking machine. It outclasses all my other appliances in my kitchen.
They cower in embarrassment.
They do.
Right?
It's sleek. It's attractive. I love the weight of the carafe.
Yes.
But I think what I like the most is the simplicity of it. You get your grounds. You put them in the cone. You put the cone on top of the hulking flagon.
Yeah.
Fill the water tank, and
you got to press a lot of buttons, right? And you have to dial some things down, pull some levers, apply some elbow grease.
Quite the opposite.
Okay.
You just tap the button once, and it goes through stages. It's 3 stages. The bloom, where you off gas all that nasty CO2. The second stage is the brew.
Yes.
Where the hot water is kind of pours over the grounds.
Right.
And then the last thing is really, now it's ready to go.
Yeah.
That's it.
Then you take it off, and does it have some kind of a scorching underside, like the belly of a dragon, in order to keep the coffee hot?
To roast it and make it really bitter.
Yes.
Right.
So that it tastes like something you'd scrape off a mud flap in January, Michigan.
It actually does not have that. The flagon that it goes into is so well designed that it can keep it naturally hot for hours.
Wow.
Yep.
So is there no kind of a acrid flavor, what one might call I don't know.
Maybe a brackish tang?
Like a brackish tang. That's a good phrase.
Yeah, it is.
We should use that.
Let's hang on to that.
So is there any kind of a brackish tang?
Nothing like that.
Huh.
It brews every morning for me. The perfect pot of coffee.
That's
Love
great.
It. Yep.
We're getting close to acting like theater kids here, Come along is the Ratio 4, the first affordable and beautiful half-batch pour-over machine. The 4 is Ratio's smallest brewer yet, an agile, sleek machine. Puts out between 5 and 20 ounces of coffee per batch, enough for 1 to 2 reasonably sized cups or 1 big travel mug. Brews with a bloom cycle in about 4 minutes or less. It's going to have a smaller footprint on the countertop, and it's going to hit a better point of affordability.
Yes.
I think they're being offered for sale right now on the website under $250. And this is a long-term, excellent investment. Now, I don't have mine yet, but it's in the mail. It's on the way.
So it would be perfect for an office.
That's right.
Yeah, home office.
That's right.
Yeah, or if you're like Dave, who's the only coffee drinker in the house.
That's right.
Would be ideal. Yes.
Yes. Maybe that'll change someday. So it's deliciously simulated pour over. And Jeff, I think we have a coupon code. Do we not for Ratio?
Yes. For the month of November, that code is ANCO3R.
All right.
3R. Do you know what the R
stands?
stands?
The R stands for reading.
Reading, of course.
Because you get your coffee made and then you read in your library garden while you're drinking your Ratio coffee.
I think that's the only thing that Cato and Cicero were missing.
That's right. It's coffee.
Was a cup of coffee.
It all fits together.
Yep.
So go to ratiocoffee.com, RATIO. November coupon code ANCO3R, and that will get you how much, Jeff?
I think it's 15% off the entire order.
Check it out.
All right, Dave, as we get back into it, I believe it is your turn.
All right.
To share some of these titles, and I can fire some of these bookclub.com questions at you. So
I'm going to be in the hot seat.
Oh, pick a book. Where would you like to start?
I would like to start with one by this famous Thomist, Edward Feser.
Okay.
5 Proofs of the Existence of God. Now, Mr. Feser is not the inventor of the Star Trek device that everyone's happy about.
Oh, okay. I'm a little disappointed already.
No, Edward Feser is a contemporary Thomist philosopher. I think he is somewhere in California.
Yeah.
And I had heard people reference him before.
Okay.
And I don't consider myself a Thomist per se, but I have a lot of interest in that particular philosopher. And I've been called upon to teach him a couple times.
Yeah.
So I thought, I better read this book.
Could you, for our audience, could you
Sure.
just a few sentences, a Thomist philosopher, what does that mean?
So Thomas Aquinas,
Yes.
1225 to 1275 AD. That's the approximate dates. And he was a Dominican preacher, scholar. His most famous work, the Summa Theologiae or Summa Theologica. The whole thing of theology, maybe you could call it that. I don't like his style because it's scholastic and it was pre-Renaissance, so kind of clunky, but an absolute brilliant thinker, drawing especially from Augustine, and really a tremendous clarity in his famous 5 arguments for the existence of God.
Yeah.
And other things like that, as well as writing the Summa Contra Gentiles, and a very important commentator on Scripture.
Yeah.
And he's made a resurgence. Aquinas has not only made a resurgence among Roman Catholics, but in the 20th century, early 21st, there have been a lot of Protestants like myself, Reformed Protestants, who are reading Aquinas to learn more about God's existence.
Yeah.
What's called classical theism.
Right.
And so some of my professional work requires me to know something about Aquinas.
Right.
And I studied philosophy as an undergrad, but I'm mostly a dilettante. So I'm trying to bone up on Aquinas and get some knowledge.
Interesting. So clearly, knowing you and as our audience knows you, you're not reading this book about, okay, convince me that God exists.
No.
You are looking for so what surprised you, or what a different take or angle that you say, okay, I can use that in my own study, my own preaching.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I really loved about this book is its structure, the way it's organized. So he goes through not Aquinas' 5 ways, but 5 separate proofs. They are the Aristotelian proof, so nothing Christian about that, although theistic. Then the Neoplatonic proof, also not Christian. The Augustinian proof, which is a variation on Neoplatonism, a particular scholar, Porphyry, and his Enneads. Then the Thomistic proof, and then the rationalist proof of Leibniz. And I can't say enough good about Feser as a writer. It was just absolutely gripping.
Really?
And yes, it really was. It was a page turner. And you can't say that about every philosophy book.
It sounds heavy.
Well, it is, but the way he designed the chapters makes the book very approachable. So he begins by describing the general problem. Then he gives like a first take on an argument. And the first take on the argument might have only 5 or 6 different propositions or statements. Then he'll discuss it a little bit longer, and then he'll give a second take, which is a more thorough, you might say, and what's the word I'm looking for? Let me see. A more formal statement of the argument. That's what he calls it. So I'm looking here at the Neoplatonic proof, page 80. A more formal statement of the argument. So he says, with the overall thrust of the reasoning of this second argument for God's existence having now been made clear, it will be useful to have a summary presented in a somewhat more formal way. It might be stated as follows. So he has a conversational approach, and he clearly has written this book with people in mind who are not professional philosophers.
Yeah.
And, I'm not a card-carrying philosopher, although I may have more knowledge than the average person.
You play one on TV.
That's correct.
Yep.
It's very, very readable. And then after he goes through that, then he devotes at least a third of the chapters to rebutting objections, some objections rebutted.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I like about him is that he is very concise and very direct.
Yeah.
So he calls out Richard Dawkins and so-called new atheists.
Yes.
And he says things like, this particular reply of theirs is so absurd, it's beneath a response. And it's not just a kind of, I don't know, it's not a caricature that he gives, or it's not, just boxing. What am I looking for? Shadow boxing or tilting at windmills. He's got the philosophical chops to back these up.
Yeah.
And it's very, very persuasive.
How did this book come on your radar?
Well, just because of the name, Edward Feser.
Oh, okay.
And so then I looked at, what of Feser should I read? And I started here.
Gotcha.
And I was not disappointed. And then I did what I often do when I read a book that I really enjoy.
Yes.
Is I contact the author if they're living. I try to find the author. And my reasoning is they're not going to make a lot of money from this book.
Yeah.
But if I can personally thank them, that might be meaningful to them.
That's a great idea.
Because that's what I would like, you know. So I looked him up. I found his email. I sent it to him, and I said, Professor Feser, I just finished this book. It was phenomenal. It expanded my mind and strengthened my faith. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Did you hear back?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Pretty much right away. And he said, that's a high compliment. Thank you for your kindness. So, I mean, what do you want out of life, right?
Yes.
I think you want, one of the things that I want is meaningful interactions with people.
Right.
And I couldn't have written that book. It's phenomenal.
Yes.
So I'd like to be able to thank him.
That's really cool. I love that. Hey, well, in the interest of time, we got to get to another book here.
Okay.
Now I get to choose.
All right.
From your list. I'm going to choose Alma Rose,
Yes.
Vienna to Auschwitz by Richard Newman.
That's correct.
What can you tell me about this book?
Yeah, so this was mentioned on the air some time ago when we did our July 4 episode, when we started out with Carl Richard, The Golden Age of the Classics in America. And I had heard about this book some time ago from a rock song from our friend Ken Tamplin.
Yeah.
And the name of the book is Alma Rose. And I mistakenly thought she was an American. No, she was Viennese. She was born in Vienna.
Okay.
And she was the niece of Gustav Mahler, the very famous composer.
Right.
And she was born in the highest of society and had the very best education and was herself a violin virtuosa. And she was married to a very famous Polish violinist who was also, I forget his name, but just a phenomenal musician. And so she grew up in the early part of the 20th century. And there's the looming and growing shadow of Nazism. Then there's the Anschluss when Hitler and the Nazis annexed Austria.
Right.
And suddenly there are all of these horrible things happening throughout Eastern Europe. And this woman, Alma Rose, primarily because of her deep devotion to her father, who was the director of the Vienna Philharmonic and a famous musician, the Rose Quartet, she stayed in Europe as the dangers began to grow, right? And she had many opportunities to get out. She was back and forth to Britain at points.
She's Jewish.
She's Jewish.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
she's back and forth to Britain at points. She's in hiding in the Netherlands very briefly. And for whatever reason, it's one of those tragic stories where you just want to yell at the page, do something.
Yeah.
And I know what happened to her, right? She died in the concentration camp. I can't remember if it was Auschwitz or Birkenau. I think it was Auschwitz. But it's a tragic story of finally she's captured. She makes one final effort to flee over the mountains into Switzerland and then into Italy. And she and her companion, who may have betrayed her, it's not clear.
Wow.
They don't make it. So she ends up in this camp, this concentration camp, but they recognize her. And she was the highest society individual, right?
Right.
And she creates a prison orchestra.
Wow.
And she saves many lives by recruiting people to play in the orchestra, some of whom have no musical ability whatsoever.
Huh.
And apparently her musical skill is so high that not everybody enjoyed working with her, but she was extremely driven because their entire survival depended upon their Nazi captors being pleased with the performance. And she was an absolute superstar. So she'd encounter someone. You ever played the upright bass? The response would be, well, I know 3 chords on the guitar. You're our bass player.
Yeah.
You're going to practice for the next 8 hours. I'm going to teach you this, and then you're going to play it live, in a week. I'm filling in details, but that's a kind of a summary of what she did.
Wow.
And then she hired someone who knew how to write music, so they would write out the scores, and so she lived a somewhat better life in this concentration camp because she offered something useful to her captors.
Yeah.
And she was not actually executed. She died of a disease, an infection, possibly poisoning. I don't want to give away too much. But again, in the early stages of the book, it's a fantastic book. But in the early stages, the author spends a lot of time on Mahler and on her father.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, if I knew more about classical music, I'd enjoy this part more. But when are you going to get to the story of Alma? Because that's the title of the book, and that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Did it strike you as filler?
Not a little bit, but I think in the end it really paid off because the tragedy of the story can't really be appreciated unless you fully understand where she came from.
Yeah.
I mean, lots and lots of people died in this horrific way.
Right.
And it doesn't diminish any of their deaths, but it makes hers more poignant if you understand better the complexity of her origins.
Indeed.
And so that's what was being done. And it's an absolute page turner.
Wow. But Dave, what does this have to do with the classics?
Well, it has a lot to do with classical music.
Okay. I tried to play that card.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
It has a lot to do with classical music. Beyond that, I don't know. I'd like to try to play the card of studying the classics makes you a careful reader.
Okay. Yeah.
I could say this would be well adapted. This just occurs to me. This could be well adapted to a Greek tragedy. Actually.
Yeah.
Because it has the same sort of plot lines in terms of you don't star in a Greek tragedy unless you are from royalty and you're from the elite.
Indeed.
Right?
Yeah.
And she was an elite aristocrat. And I mean, her family knew people like Freud, and they knew princes and kings and queens and so forth. And so for this to happen to her was in some ways really shocking. Her brother moved to the United States and was, playing for the Cincinnati Orchestra. He got out. She didn't.
Yeah, and you've got reversals of fortune. You have recognition scenes. It's
like a tragedy.
Yeah. All right, Dave. We've got it's your pick.
Getting low on time.
We're getting low on time. So why don't you pick something?
Yeah. So I want to talk about this book, which actually was inspired by my reading Edward Feser's book, 5 Arguments for the Existence of God. Mm-hmm. He just mentioned kind of offhand this fellow Gaven Kerr. And the title of this one is Aquinas' Way to God.
Okay.
The Proof in De Ente et Essentia, which is on being and essence. Mm-hmm. And, I read a lot of books. Some of them are easy to read. This one was tough.
Okay.
I mean, this
slog.
It was hard, yeah. But it paid off in some important ways. I, for the first time in my life, understood Aquinas' distinction between existence and essence.
Okay. You want to break that down for us, or is it or move on to...
So existence has to do with activity and action, what you actually are, and essence has to do with potency, what you could be or not be.
Okay.
The actuality or the act and potency distinction in Aquinas' thought. And although it's hard to understand at first, it took me a lot of time to understand it. Once you understand it, it's quite revelatory. In God alone are act and potency undistinguished. They are identical. There's no such thing. God is all action. There's nothing in him waiting to come to fruition. Right?
Yeah.
So you and I have certain qualities or characteristics. Some of them we share, some don't. But there are other things that we could be.
Yes.
And these would be potencies, right? Latent skills and so forth, presumably.
Yes.
In God, there's nothing like that. What he is all that he is at all times.
Yeah.
And there's nothing in him that could come into existence.
Interesting.
And that's part of the distinction between being and essence. And there's examples of things like a unicorn, right? Mm-hmm. So a unicorn has a certain essence because you can imagine a creature that's a horse with one horn, and you can even imagine it having rainbow colors and a pink tail and so forth.
Yeah.
So you could describe its essence, but so far as we know, it has no true existence.
Interesting.
So it examines questions like that. And do you remember earlier in this episode we talked about Hearst donuts?
Yes, of course I remember. Yes.
I carefully planted that suggestion because I wanted to talk about donuts in this book.
Wait, there's donuts in this book?
You betcha. So this is from page 155, and the title of the chapter is Esse Tantum, Existence Only. He says, consider a donut. A donut is a circular pastry with a hole in the center. Without the hole in the center, the donut is not a donut, but some other pastry. The hole is essential for the very being of the donut, yet the hole is nothing of the donut. It is wholly other than the donut, such that if it were not wholly other, there would be no donut. Thus, the hole in the donut is utterly transcendent, but in being utterly transcendent is so fundamentally immanent to the donut that without it, there would be no donut. Having explicated the nature of esse tantum, that is being only, let us now consider some objections offered against this peculiar notion of God. That was great. I read 155 pages to get to the donut metaphor.
That's fantastic.
And it pulled together everything I didn't understand.
That is great. I think, I mean, why have a gustatory parting shot after that? That's right. That's it right there.
Do we have time for me to read one little other thing from this book?
We do. Yes.
All right. So this is from page 167. And this was the big payoff, too, for me. And that is, in the book of Exodus, chapter 3, God says, I am who I am, when he's talking to Moses at the burning bush.
Yeah.
So he says, a further reflection, this is Kerr, a further reflection on the congruence between the Mosaic and Thomistic conceptions of God is worth noting. The author of the biblical text was no trained philosopher. He did not display that characteristic flair of reasoning necessary in philosophical matters. So his statement that the God of the Hebrews is who he is not a conclusion made on the basis of philosophical reasoning. But consider the latter along with the fact that the Mosaic conception of God as he who is had no known predecessor of which we can tell. In other words, you can't find that in any of the other worldly religions.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I am who I am, he said. So to continue Kerr, so it seems that without any deep metaphysical insight, nor with any explicit prior determination as such, the author of the biblical text has managed to offer an expression of God that just happens to be in accord with some of the most profound metaphysical reasoning about the nature of God and his relation to the world in the history of Western thought.
Wow.
This certainly raises the awareness of one dedicated to thinking through such things in a serious manner, and it no doubt raised the awareness of Aquinas, as it ought to do for us today. So that was the big payoff.
Wow, that's really good. So it was worth the slog.
It was hard. It was dense reasoning. And, and sometimes I don't get it the first time. I got to pause and read through it again. Then he throws you a donut.
So so was that a book written by a Thomas scholar, written for other Aquinas scholars?
So unlike the Feser book, and there's another one I'm going to read pretty soon by Feser called The Last Superstition, which is a similar theistic arguments against atheism.
Okay.
The Feser book is written at a popular level. This one is not. And so that's why it was challenging for me. But, I have kind of a love-hate relationship with such books. It's like going to the gym, right? I'd like to have the notion of getting stronger and getting in shape, but sometimes in the course of doing it, it's hard. It's grueling.
It is grueling. Yep. Excellent. Well, Dave, I believe we got to do this again.
We got to do this again.
This was a lot of fun.
So one little point here before we wrap it up is what are you going to read next?
Boy,
what's on your list of next things to read?
That was another thing that you asked of me, and
you conveniently ignored.
No, I did not ignore. I wrote some stuff down.
All right.
But I don't really have anything that's like in my queue that I'm itching to read.
Really?
Right now. One of the things I've been into is reading some of H.P. Lovecraft's kind of horror fiction.
Oh.
Which another one of these guys that I've often heard about, and you hear Lovecraftian as an adjective. So I want to find out what that meant.
Never heard that.
So I started reading some, and there's I really like it. So that's probably what I'm going to dive into.
Okay.
Kind of short form horror fiction from the 1930s.
All right.
Yeah. How about you?
There's a number of things I'm really itching to read, and one is Justinian, Emperor, Soldier, Saint, by one Peter Saris. And I don't know this scholar, although I have bumped into him on Twitter, x.com, and this book looks fascinating. So this is one of those areas, like you were saying earlier, where I know something, but I feel like I don't know as much as I should.
Yeah.
So the reign of Theodosius and Justinian, the Christian Eastern emperors, I confuse them sometimes.
Right.
It's hard to keep it straight. And so I'm really looking forward to this volume, and maybe we'll do an episode on it.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to read something on Erasmus on language and method in theology. I expect that to be a little bit of a slog, but again, one of those professional obligations, because I need to know something about Erasmus. I'm really excited to read this one by Halik Kachansky, which is Resistance, the Underground War Against Hitler from 1939 to 1945. So with the Alma Rose and so forth, I'm going through a little bit of a revisit World War II.
Yeah.
I read a lot of this stuff as a kid and kind of got enough.
Right.
But I have a little bit of a renewed interest for a while.
And you told me you've been listening to podcasts on the World War II as well.
Yeah,
so
primarily because of the high production quality.
Yeah.
And then I listened to one on Napoleon, and it wasn't quite as good.
Gotcha.
So those are the things that may be coming down the pike.
Very cool. Excellent.
All right, Jeff, so we have to get out of here because no one in particular is trying to get into the vomitorium.
They're all out there voting.
Yes.
Right, exactly.
And book clubbing.
And book clubbing.
We need to thank some people, however, Jeff, and who are those persons?
Let's thank Mishka, our wonderful engineer.
Thank you,
Turns
Mishka.
us around and makes us sound way more professional than we actually are.
Let's thank some folks for the music.
Yeah, who's that? Who do we got there?
Mr. Scott Van Zen, a combination of Stevie Ray Vaughan and Eddie Van Halen.
Yep.
Wailing bluesy guitars for the intro and the outro music, and Mr. Ken Tamplin, who composed much of that music and gives us the bumper music as well.
Indeed, yes. So many thanks for their great generosity.
Yes, and you can check out their programs online, the Scott Van Zen Guitar School, if you want to play like him and you have, 20 years of 10 hours a day to practice. Just kidding, of course. I mean, you can make a start. It's better to make a start.
Yes.
And then Ken's Vocal Academy.
Indeed.
And Jeff, what if they want to get in touch with us?
It's very easy. You can write to Dave at adnauseum.com. Don't forget that V in there.
Or Jeff at adnauseum.com. Do not forget the V for ad nauseum. We didn't hear back from Gil Witzfeld.
No.
I don't know what happened with that.
It makes me a little nervous.
I am a little nervous as well. And we have merchandise you can purchase if you want to show people that you are...
taking the classics and keeping them down.
Yes, go to adnauseum.com and check out the shop page, our Lurch with merch. You can get a hat. You can get a mug. Can they get a shirt?
They can get a shirt. They can get stickers. And
Right.
Check it out. Attractive, wonderful stuff. But yeah, show to the world that you are taking the classes and keeping them down.
That's correct. And if you would like to get a free copy of Stanley Lombardo's translation of Ovid's Metamorphoses, we got a couple of those still kicking around.
Yeah.
Frankly, I was a little underwhelmed by the audience response.
Okay, yeah.
I felt like maybe they should be rebuked almost.
Really?
Aren't you out there reading? Come on.
Devouring books?
That's right.
Right, yeah.
So just send me an email and say, hey, I'd like to score one of those free copies. And Jeff has promised to sketch a little cartoon in the inside cover.
I will do that. Yes. Hey, what's up for next week?
Episode 166.
Are we're TBD-ing?
I think we're TBDing it. Maybe go back to Mahru.
Okay.
Pick up that thread.
Yep.
But we'll see. And we're going to have a bit of a hiatus, I am afraid, when I'm traveling internationally.
When are you taking off?
I'm going to take off middle of next week or so.
Okay.
So we're going to miss a few. Segments, a few episodes, but we'll get back to it in December with some great things.
Sounds great. Yeah.
And Jeff, I believe that you have our gustatory parting shot, do you not?
Yes, and this comes from my wife.
Really?
Actually, right.
The lovely Rebecca Winkle.
Yes, and this is for her road trip wisdom. And so this comes from a road trip we were on as a family.
Okay.
And there was kind of vying needs for a rest stop and also a need to go through a drive-through.
So you need to eat something.
Yeah.
And you need to use the restroom.
Right.
Oh, those are the realities of life on the road.
Exactly. So they were competing interests in the van, and my dear wife, spoke up and said, "Hey, bladders before burgers."
She laid down the law.
She did.
There you go. That is not a tub of crock.
No, not at all. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.